All right. Well, welcome everybody to Preservation Dallas's annual Summer Sizzlers session. We're so happy to have everybody here with us. Tonight we've got a great one about the Outlaws and Architecture of Dallas. And an amazing presenter, John Slate. If some of y'all don't know him, he is the city archivist for the city of Dallas. And he is pretty much in charge of the preservation of the city government records of the Dallas Municipal Archives. He's done some amazing work. He's worked a lot with the Texas Historical Commission, and if you ever get a chance to go down and see his archives, are really, really incredible. So anyways, I'm going to leave this up to John, and at the end we'll have a Q&A, so if you want to drop any questions into the Q&A panel, we will get to those at the end. So welcome, John.
Thank you so much, Irene, and welcome everyone. I hope you're having a good evening and everyone had a good Labor Day weekend and such. And anyhow, I'm going to talk a little bit about Outlaws and Architecture. So how are they related and how do they relate to Preservation Dallas? Pretty simple. There's been some questions raised lately about the ethics and about the moral legacy of the history of Dallas. And some as we look at preserving things like the Barrow family gas station and a couple of the other houses like anyhow, several of the different kinds of houses that are around there that are connected to outlaws and criminal activity in Dallas. My answer to that is they're part of our history too, sort of good and bad. And I think all you have to do is look to Dealey Plaza as an example. This is a site of a national, if not international, tragedy. And a lot of people think, well, why should we save these buildings? But if you look at the fact that Dealey Plaza is the second most visited tourist site in the state next to the Alamo, I think that kind of answers the question. It's fascinating. People want to walk in the footsteps, even if it's something that was unpleasant or unfortunate. Of course, things like Bonnie and Clyde have a certain romance to them, and again, not everybody agrees on that. But let me. I want to let you know that most of the photographs and documents that are in here come from the Dallas Municipal Archives. We preserve these so we can do these kinds of talks, and also for people to do research. But we do include, I've had to fill in the gaps with a couple of things, and I hope you'll enjoy what we had to show. I also like to let you know that we have a friends group, a 501 group that is dedicated to helping the archives do things that it can't do inside its normal budget, which is pretty small. And this is to help purchase supplies for professional education and development of our staff, which is myself and the assistant city archivist, Kristen Nutter. But and also to do some future training. We'd like to start getting classes to start from, say, high school on into graduate school, to start using primary materials in the classroom. And this is one way we'd like to do that. So if you want to know more about the Friends of the Dallas Municipal Archives, just Google it and you should be able to pull up our websites. And with that, let me start with things. This is just a picture to show you the variety of the sort of grim people associated with some of these sites. But, I'm going to start with going way back to something that actually was outside of Dallas at the time it happened, but Myra Bell Shirley's, probably better known to most people as Belle Starr, has a strong North Texas connection. When she was a little girl, her family moved from Missouri to Syene, which was basically where on the edge of what's now Mesquite. And today it is still inside the Dallas city line. It's basically, let's look at Old Saline for a minute. These are basically is the old footprint of the town of Saline. And of course we still have Saline Road, which is sort of a reminder of it, but really it's right around the family farm was kind of in the area of St. Augustine Road, and in that area, and actually going down toward Elam as well. And so this area is pretty famous for that. And there's, I think, a Bell Star Drive, that kind of thing. And anyhow, she, of course, is pretty famous for having hooked up or having gotten together with some of the James gang and the Youngers and so forth. She also married a guy named Jim Reed when she was young and living on this little farm. As far as the actual site, I think some folks located the well for the family home, but I don't believe they've saved any part of the farm. If it was an early 1860s farm, I would imagine it was probably a pretty humble structure. I don't really want to speculate too much on what it actually was, but let's see in my next slide. This is roughly the area where the family farm would have been, and you can see at the bottom of the red circle that there's a red dot, and that's the edge of what's now the city park called Crawford Park. And there's a lot of local lore there about Crawford Park. And if you'll see the creek that runs through all the way through that red circle there, that is one of the creeks that has some outcroppings, or some, not outcroppings, little cave indentions. And it's long been repeated by locals that Belle Starr used these as hideaways. I think she learned about them as a child, and when she went and did some of her banditry, I believe people have said that she used those caves for hiding. And anyhow, there's a piece of that creek running through Crawford Park, so it's not only inside the city limits of Dallas now, but it's also partly in a Dallas City Park, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Hi, John. John, can you hear me? Do you think that you could possibly get closer to your microphone? I've had some people say they're having a hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me now better?
A little bit. Is there any way you can get closer to your microphone?
Yep, this is it.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, folks. Sorry about that. Anyhow, this is a vintage photo of Crawford Park around the time that it was purchased by the city of Dallas. And there's a lovely photo of Belle Starr with her one-time boyfriend, Blue Duck. And if anyone's read Larry McMurtry's books, you know that Blue Duck shows up in there a few places. And anyhow, this is, as wild as the stories are, much of it is rooted in actual real history. And the Shirley family farm was actually there was there. So anyhow, that's one example. I'm going to fast forward up here to the Barrow gang, of which a lot of this talk is about, because again, this is all about preservation, and you see the sort of sorry condition of this poor building. It's not a very distinguished building, but it has a pretty distinguished history, because this is where the Barrow family moved after they had been living in tents by the river. And this is someone who, Clyde Barrow, who grew up in extremely impoverished circumstances, which is one reason why he may have felt that he didn't really have a lot to lose when he became a career criminal. And growing up in West Dallas, he was around a lot of people who were near him in age, who also didn't have a lot to do. So, and they needed easy money, and robbery was one of them. So he joined his brother. He joined his neighbors, the Hamilton brothers, Raymond and Floyd. His neighborhood friend down the street on Singleton, which is now a set of apartments, is where W.D. Jones lived, who's one of his young accomplices. But anyhow, this is the Barrow family gas station that is now being considered for protected status by the city. Also, of course, his other accomplice was the woman that he fell in love with, Bonnie Parker, and she grew up in the neighborhood over here off of Chalk Hill, which is called Cement City. And she actually went to this little school here, and it has been beautifully preserved and reopened as an event space. But it's the old Eagle Ford School, and not just Cement City, but Eagle Ford, which itself was a boom town in the late 1800s. And anyhow, this beautiful building, the Eagle Ford School, is a 1924 Gothic revival style building, and you can see the Greek keys in there, which is or the castellated elements that are in it. The other building that's kind of endangered right now, that's connected to the Barrow gang, is this building on Crossman, which is connected to not just the Barrow gang, but also to Hattie Rankin Moore. And this is a shotgun style house. As you can see, it's been divided into 2 units, but I will get into the story of Hattie Rankin Moore in just a minute, which will let you know more about why this little unassuming house is so important. It was big for a shootout, one of the few shootouts that's been documented inside the city limits. But let me move on. This is actually catty corner across the street from it on Crossman, and I don't know if anybody's really thought about trying to preserve this house. It's a craftsman style house. It is being occupied. It's a private site, so it's being it was the home of not Raymond Hamilton, but his brother Floyd Hamilton, and it's in all the city directories and things like that. But while we're thinking about preserving Barrow gang related buildings, I really hope that people will think about this one on Crossman. This is 3111, or excuse me, not 3111, 3018 North Crossman, and this is probably where Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, and his wife Blanche probably stayed part time. But it was again, it was the Hamilton family's house, Floyd Hamilton's house, and Floyd and his brother Raymond were accomplices in the Barrow gang, and neither of them ended up terribly well. They both ended up in prison. Raymond went to the electric chair, and Floyd actually made it through his stint in prison and became a preacher. And he went around talking about why you shouldn't fall in with gangs when you're a teenager, that kind of thing. Anyhow, here's how it all ties together, and it ties together neatly again with the Dallas City Park. And this photo is a picture from the late 1940s of Hattie Rankin Moore Park. And Hattie Rankin Moore was a woman who was deeply religious, and she was very concerned about poverty and poor living conditions in West Dallas, and specifically the issues of having parks for children and healthy places for children to do things, recreation, as an alternative to getting into gangs and thievery and things like that. And this little clipping that's on here that you may or may not be able to read says, "We have no parks, no playgrounds, no handy schools, no lights, no water, no gas." She could have included paving. There was not a lot of paving in West Dallas. The dogs in Dallas are housed better than our boys and girls. And she ended up donating the land for this park. It's a little tiny park, but it is also adjacent to that entire neighborhood that I just showed you some images of. So when Raymond Hamilton was on death row and was slated for execution, and his time came up, Ms. Moore went and joined the Hamilton brothers' mother and prayed with her and so forth to, I'm sorry, I need to get closer again, to reassure her, give her some comfort as her son headed to the electric chair. Anyhow, what else other buildings are connected with Bonnie and Clyde? Well, this is the Hartgraves Cafe, and it is also an endangered building because there had been some plans to do things with it. And those, as far as I know, when I came and took this photograph back in around April, it's not looking too high, and I really hope somebody will do something with it. But anyhow, this is, according to maps, this was a trolley stop, which is one reason why it is on a curve, and it's Swiss Circle is where it is, 3302 through 3304 Swiss Circle. And one reason it's important to the Bonnie and Clyde story is because Bonnie Parker worked here when there was a little cafe in one of these units. Anyhow, before that, it was, interestingly enough, a place called Ramsey's Sudatorium. It was a clothing store in the mid-1920s before it was divided up into shops, into a copy shop and so forth. It's a 1915 brick building with a kind of deco-y style to it, but it's beautiful, Dallas-style red brick if you take off the exterior paint that's on there right now. Anyhow, and just down Swiss Avenue, seriously, just a couple blocks away, is a building that's been renovated and is now private residence, I believe. But it was United Mirror and Glass, which is where one of the few times that Clyde Barrow had a legitimate job, and this was where the building that he worked in. So lucky person it's a fairly undistinguished building and kind of a warehouse of sorts. So kind of can't blame someone for doing some adaptive reuse with it. But it's pretty fascinating that to think that someone gets to live in a warehouse that was one of the few places that Clyde Barrow worked in. And speaking of Clyde, there is his mugshot taken in the Dallas Police Department. And if he had been photographed by the Dallas Police Department as a youngster or as a very young man, he looks here like he's about 18 or 19. He would have been photographed up in the highest level of this building, which is the municipal building, also known as the Old Dallas City Hall, built in 1914. And it's been lovingly restored, now the home of the UNT Law School at Dallas. But it's a gorgeous building, and of course it's a Beaux-Arts revival, and that was still going strong in 1914, but it's got beautiful mansard roof. And anyhow, the Dallas City Jail for many years, up even into the 1970s, was still in the area that's right behind the mansard roofs, and they have managed to rescue or save or preserve at least one block of the cells, which was the one where Lee Harvey Oswald was held in 1963. Oh. And anyhow, this lovely elevation drawing is in the Municipal Archives, and there's a beautiful set of these. These are all hand-drawn, ink on linen drawings, and you just don't see architectural drawing like this anymore. And we're proud to be able to show it off in all of its glory. Now, from the city, we go to the county, and this, of course, is the county criminal courts building, which is a lovely building. I love this one very much, and it is, as we speak, being cleaned up and having abatement done to it, and it's being lovingly restored to become the new home of the Dallas County Commissioners Court. And it is, what was I going to say? It's Renaissance Revival is what I have read or heard it described as. And it's a gorgeous building. Again, uses that iconic, ubiquitous red brick that is all known all over Dallas. But this is the site of so many different things. It's where the Dallas County Sheriff's Department was headquartered. Of course, the county jail. The photograph in the lower right-hand corner is of Sheriff Schmidt and a number of the people who were in the posse, the Dallas County Sheriff's Department posse members who were present at the ambush of Bonnie and Clyde. Anyhow, they would have officed here. Later on, of course, it was where Lee Harvey Oswald was held, or excuse me, not Lee Harvey Oswald, and Jack Ruby, where Jack Ruby was transferred. Lee didn't make it there. He was about to be transferred there. Anyhow, it also figures into another interesting gangster story, which I will get to shortly. While we're still on the subject of Bonnie and Clyde, let's talk about where they ended up. Of course, as you all know, they were ambushed, and their bodies were taken back to Dallas, and this is the funeral home where Clyde Barrow, where his funeral was held. And let's see, this was Sparkman Holtz brand funeral home at the time. This formerly was the mansion for A.H. Below, better known as the founder of the Dallas Morning News. And it's one of the few intact mansions still left on Ross Avenue. And it's a beautiful, beautiful building. Of course, it's now the home of the Dallas County Bar Association, but it was completed around 1900 and is a design of Herbert Green, H.M. Green, and is a neoclassical with Corinthian columns. Beautiful, beautiful building. But this was being used as a funeral home in the 1930s and was where Clyde Barrow's funeral was held. Now, Bonnie's was held further south off of Forest Avenue. And this is McCamey Campbell Funeral Home. And this is a photograph from the actual funeral. And it is approximately where I-45 crosses Forest Avenue. And it's no longer standing, but if you're looking at the Forest Theater, if you turn straight around, that's where this building would have been. Where it would have been right in that block. But anyhow, it's a lovely building itself, and of course, it's got sort of a Greek revival look with Corinthian columns and pediment and so forth on it. Now, as far as burials go, I thought I'd throw in some cemeteries, some historic cemeteries, because they're a part of preservation too. Bonnie's first resting place was at the old Fishtrap Cemetery, and the Fishtrap Cemetery is off by this lake, which is this little artificial lake, which is called Fishtrap Lake, and it is well inside West Dallas, and it is the cemetery is actually the one of the most historic cemeteries in Dallas, and this is an image of it. It's kind of smallish, but it was being used by the French and Swiss and Belgian and German settlers who came to found the La Reunion utopian colony. And here's the state landmark marker for it. And very fascinating story. Anyhow, there was enough trouble with Bonnie that people and too many visitors there, not enough protection of the cemetery, that her family moved her body over to Crown Hill Cemetery. And Crown Hill is an equally fascinating cemetery with a lot of Dallas notables in it, but this is the marker that uses a couple of the stanzas from her poetry that she wrote while she was on the land, and quite a fascinating story. Here's the map of Crown Hill, if you want to see sort of the shape of it. Now for Clyde and his brother Buck, whose real name was Ivan, or Marvin I. Barrow. They were buried side by side in Western Heights Cemetery. And this, again, was taken, I think, in April of this year. And here they are. Here's the slab for Clyde and Marvin Ivan Barrow. And it's visited regularly by tourists and people who are fascinated with their story. It is again, one of those cemeteries that could probably use some help. As you saw at the last photo, you can see there's been some damage to the fences, but it's a beautiful tree shaded cemetery. Again, it's very important to the history of the West Dallas area. Let's see here. And since we're finishing up talking about the Barrow gang, I thought I might bring up the home of one of the lawmen who was heavily involved, and that was Sheriff Schmidt. And Sheriff Schmidt lived in this house over in Munger Place, or in the Munger Place area at 5119 Rieger. And it's sort of a prairie-ish, sort of four-square type house. It's really more of a prairie style, but it's a beautiful building, and it's been pretty well taken care of. And again, I think it's worth noting where the lawmen lived as well as the criminals, as well as the desperados. And again, continuing on with law enforcement, let's talk about where would the FBI have been. When the FBI was, of course, heavily involved with the search for Bonnie and Clyde. Needless to say, the Dallas office of the FBI would have been a very busy place, and it was on the 4th floor of this building, which is the old city post office, and it's over there off of Bryan. Beautiful, beautiful building, very nicely restored. And anyhow, this is where the FBI field agents would have been gathering their intelligence on the Bonnie and Clyde gang, or the Barrow gang, I should say. Okay, I told you I would go back to the criminal courts building for another story, and this was a pretty entertaining one. This is Harvey Bailey, who, if you haven't heard of him, his story is fascinating. He was associated with Machine Gun Kelly, and Machine Gun Kelly certainly got a lot more famous, but Harvey Bailey was actually one of the most successful robbers in American history, bank robbers, and was a career criminal involved with all kinds of things. And here is his mugshot from the Dallas Police Department, which is a part of our DPD collections. And anyhow, he would do just about anything to make money. He was interested in safe cracking, and he worked with people to rob pretty good-sized sums of money. He was actually involved in the kidnap of a gentleman, of an oil man in Oklahoma City named Urschel, and he was involved in the kidnapping and ransoming of Mr. Urschel, and he's one of the people who actually, I believe, got away and was pulling other crimes at the time that he was sent to, that he was captured, sentenced, and then he spent time in Alcatraz, and then I believe he went to Leavenworth, and then he was actually served his time. And but at one point in the 30s, when he was being housed or given some accommodations in the Dallas County Jail, he was put in what was called an escape-proof jail. This photograph shows otherwise. He had files smuggled in, and you can see that he managed to hack out or saw his way out of this unbreakable jail. And there's a whole series of photographs of these. By the way, a lot of this is all on the Portal to Texas History, which you may find of interest if you want to look at it yourself sometime. But anyhow, Harvey Bailey made it out of the unbeatable Dallas County Jail, but of course, the long arm of the law ended up catching up to him. And he served out his time, and here he is at the end of his life. He ended up telling his story to the Texas historian J. Evetts Haley. There's a small book which is very hard to find today, which is I think it's called My Business Was Robbing Banks. And he became a religious man and talked to kids, stay away from crime, that kind of stuff. But this is him in his very later days, and actually giving an interview in these photos. Well, let's move over back to East Dallas. And this is the story of a lesser-known gangster who was an interesting fellow by the name of Louis Ferrantello, who was known in his gambling circles as Chicken Louie. And Chicken Louie's family was involved with a poultry business that was located at the Dallas Farmers Market or adjacent to it. So that's why he was called Chicken Louie. And he was a gambler's gambler, probably gambled away several fortunes. It is said that he had betting houses or somewhere in the Munger Place area that consisted of just a building with nothing going on other than, a couple of chairs and a telephone, which means that there was probably illegal betting going on. And anyhow, Chicken Louie was a pretty slick guy. He was able to avoid a lot for much of the time. Because gambling in Texas had gone to epidemic proportions, the state legislature did its own Kefauver style crime committee investigation, and Chicken Louie was brought in, and I believe he took the fifth something like 98 or 99 times, something like that. And I believe when he was being deposed, he was asked, "What is the color of your shirt white?" And he said, "I refuse to answer that. It might incriminate me." Anyhow, going back to East Dallas, Chicken Louie also was a bit of an entrepreneur and had a place called Anthony's Lounge at 6410 Gaston. And that's right at the point where Gaston and Abrams connect. It's considerably changed because of the Gaston-Abrams cutoff that was created in the 70s, and I think into the early 80s. But anyhow, Anthony's no longer stands, but it was actually located in a portion of the Lakewood shopping village that no longer exists, but it would have been pretty much across from Lakewood Country Club. And here is a vintage photo of the old Lakewood Village, and as you can see, it had a kind of a deco style because it was being built up in the 20s and 30s, and mostly in the 1930s. But the storefronts that you can see on the left side of the photo are probably pretty close to what Antony's would have looked like. It probably had some decoration in it, but it would have been more or less across the street from those storefronts. And pretty fascinating time and place. Anyhow, Chicken Louie didn't end up in prison, and he was also a ladies' man, and that got him in even more trouble. And Chicken Louie was shot to death in his office by a jilted lover. And fascinating story. It's you know, it's great Dallas true crime, and there's a whole story behind it, and it gets even crazier actually after that. But this is the sad end of Chicken Louie. Anyhow, let's continue. Where are we? This is essentially the end, pretty much the end of our story. I've probably gone a little too fast on this, but I wanted to at least let people know that I think it's really important to preserve these kinds of buildings. I think there's more buildings associated with outlaws and famous law enforcement figures and that kind of thing. And I really think that we could do a better job of preserving these places, because this, whether it's good history or not great history, it's still a part of our cultural heritage. And I believe that this is one of the keys to reviving Dallas economy, which is cultural heritage tourism. And this is, I think, a part of it. Anyhow, thank you very much for your patience and your time. I'm